Dupont, and I'm one of the Associate University Librarians here at Boston College. On behalf of all of the library staff here, I welcome you to Burns Library, as the Burns Librarian as well. And many of you, this is your first time here, and I hope that you'll come to other programs, events that we have. We do like to gather people in this space. And it's even the very first time to have both Harriet Bart and Maxim Shrayer together in person and in this room. So, good. Oh, there is my friend. Okay, good shot. And we are here this particular hour, Maxim, who's a professor here at Boston College, with many of your students. And we will have a chance to hear from at least some of the students here in the next little bit. So thank you for coming on at 3 o'clock here on a Thursday afternoon. And I apologize for my voice. This is actually our classroom. And yesterday we had a group of students who were working with another of our professors on the history of the French language, and I was talking all about en français and manuscripts and books and things. So I'm sorry if I've lost my voice here a little bit. My role here is really simply to introduce you and welcome. I think Harriet will introduce herself through a presentation that she will do momentarily. Maxim will say more about his class and Holocaust literature and how their collaboration came about in this artist book that you will have a chance to see. Actually, it's on the table in front of Harriet and Maxim. And then afterward, we'll invite you to come and look at her book, their book, I should say, and some other things from our collections, and even a Holocaust-inspired book from Wellesley College. We have the curator of Wellesley College here, Ruth Rogers, with us. So thank you, Ruth, for contributing to our display here. And then, so after Harriet, Maxim, the students, we'll engage in a little conversation together. Again, this is a reflective hour. And then for those who can stay a bit longer, we do have some coffee and tea and cookies and things to continue conversation for the afternoon. So with that, I'd really like to step out of the way, all right, and invite Harriet, please, from Minneapolis to Boston here this week. And,
I'm glad to be here. And I want to thank Maxim for inviting me to Boston College, and Christian Dupont for making all the many arrangements to make this happen today. And in a few minutes, I'll show you a little bit about my work, and in a few minutes, Maxim and I will have a conversation moderated by Christian, and we'll talk more about the book, I Saw It. But in order to contextualize my work and my particular interest in the book, I Saw It, and why I was so eager to take on the challenge of working with Maxim, a literary artist, with my work. It's not always easy to collaborate. But in order to make that clear, I've been asked to give an overview of my work. So a few things before we look at some images. I'm a conceptual artist. I work across media and disciplines. I see myself as a kind of cultural storyteller, even a visual poet. I have a deep and abiding interest in the personal and cultural expression of memory. It is at the core of my work. I create evocative content through the narrative power of objects. You'll see a lot of objects in this work. The theater of installation, which is, as it says, theatrical, and the intimacy of artists' books. Each of my projects begins with fascination with the subject or an object and moves forward with intensely focused research, which hopefully leads to the creation of a body of work. Inspired by the written work, research for me starts with reading, with books. The book is always my touchstone. My formal training in the early 70s, long time ago, was in contemporary tapestry and architectural sculptural fibers. In the 80s, I made paintings. Both my paintings and my tapestries often included text. By the mid-1980s, I began working with found objects, quotidian objects, among them the book. And the book I often use as a cultural signifier, a building block, and you'll see that in some of the work, sculptural object, poetic object, time capsule, and as time went by, fine press books. It has been said that every era gets the art it deserves. Each of us is formed by our personal and cultural experience. Mine is the art of memory. I was born 6 months before the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Late in the war, my father was drafted into the Navy, and my mother and I went to live with my grandparents, who were in Duluth, Minnesota. War, activism, protests have been a part of my life. In the early 70s, I became active in the women's movement and was a founding member of a women's art collective in Minneapolis called WARM, Women's Collective Art Space. In 2020, the University of Minnesota Weissman Art Museum presented my retrospective, Abracadabra and Other Forms of Protection, an exhibition that covered some 45 years of my work. I'd like to take you on a quick tour of that exhibition. And following that, I'll focus on a few commemorative projects, and then we will have our conversation. I'm not sure. Oh, yeah.
Oh, did I have the wrong, I copied the wrong slide, oh my goodness.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, no. And, that's the one.
Ah, same buttons?
Same buttons.
So Abracadabra and Other Forms of Protection. What you're looking at here is a black granite book with the words Abracadabra inscribed in it. As I said, I work across media and disciplines. I view the whole exhibition as a kind of installation, and I'm not going to dwell on all of the pieces here. Some of them you'll see in more detail soon. But what I did want to get across was the idea of the variety of materials. So you're looking here at this very large red painting on canvas, stitching, painting, language, which was, it was an homage to the war in Vietnam, which is very typical of the work that I do, is to acknowledge war and various events in our cultural history. You'll also see on the right, let's see if we can, okay. So it's awfully bright in here. Can you see that? Can you see that? It's not too bright for you? Okay. So as I said, I started out, my work was primarily in tapestry and sculptural fiber, and this for me was the 5 sections of a woman's life. The first being oh, it moved. Can I get back? Okay. It doesn't want me to do this too long. Okay. Okay, now I want to go back to this. Okay, will it stay there?
Yeah.
Okay, so we start with the innocent, the siren. In the middle is the matriarch, and the fourth is the mourner, and the last is the ancestor. But I'm interested in for you to see the variety of media in this work. So here's another shot of that same exhibition, and you will see some of this work again more closely. The scrolls here, that piece is called Requiem. You'll see the plumb bobs that are hanging there. There's the bronze pendulum in the corner, the bronze bowls, and then there's a painting. So to get another view of it, and you will see in the back wall, Enduring Afghanistan, which is a commentary on the war in Afghanistan. We will look a little more closely at some of those. And then the painting is Sunset Gates, and it's kind of an erasure poem from the Emma Lazarus quote on the base of the Statue of Liberty. It's acrylic, gold, cord. So I think that my work has a strong tactile quality to it. And here another shot of some of the work in that exhibition. The piece on the far wall, that's a little higher than the others, is the earliest work in the exhibition, and it dates to 1975. And it's actually a crocheted piece. It's kind of a ceremonial garment or cape. There's a better shot of it. And my work transitioned from the tapestry to the more minimal kind of architectural element, and then the woven painted canvas. Just gotta keep on moving through it here. You'll see in my work as we progress that there's a lot of references to the garment and to the body, and protective armor is how I see clothing. So this is a piece it's from an exhibition that I had in New York called Strong Silent Type. And the garment patterns on the wall are made of industrial steel, blackened steel. And those on the ground that are causing reflections on the wall are chrome. But again, these dress patterns is steel and strong and armor-like. All right. When I was talking about using the book as an object, time capsule, building block, this large piece in the center is made from books, actual books that have been painted, sealed, painted, and I use them in a number of configurations as building blocks. And one of the things that was important to me about that as a woman artist, that I could make large things by myself without a crew, and when I would go to install these things, I'd pack them up in cardboard boxes, put them in the back of my car, bring them where I was going, and then build them. Take them down, bring them back. So it was something that I could do without a crew, independently. Sometimes people refer to them as ghost books. They are real books. Some of them have the titles etched, engraved in the material that they're covered with. And in the background, you'll see a piece on that back wall called Ganitsa, which is, Ganitsa is, in many ways, I look at it as kind of a reverent place where things are stored, documents, the Word of God, religious artifacts, relics of text are stored. For me, these were objects that I thought of as being a part of the collection of my work, the things that mattered to me, that were sacred to me. I'm going to go back and call your attention to one thing that's changed in this. I don't know if you picked it up. In the top row, second from the left, there is something that looks like it's very graphic, little red, white, and black, and that is a Nazi flag. It was a flag that I found in my mother's cedar chest where she stored blankets many, many years ago, and I was going and visiting her, and I'm going through the trunk and found it, and I pulled it out and said, "Mom, what is this?" And it was a flag that my uncle captured in World War II in the Battle of Metz. So I asked her if I could have it, and then I had to figure out what to do with it to keep it safe. So I created a book around it. The spine of the book is a railroad track. The book is sealed in there with bars, metal bars, front, back, and also on the opening side of the book. There's no key, there's no lock, it's all welded in there. And then when I finished the book, I thought, what do I do with it? So I'm happy to say that it's in the collection of the Jewish Museum, because I had some worry that if it were out in the public realm, someone might find the flag more interesting than the object. So it's in a safe place. But it was on loan for this exhibition from the Jewish Museum, and I noticed, because my assistant pulled the wrong slide, when we got to it, if you look there, it's not there anymore. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to clarify that was generously on loan from the Jewish Museum, and it's been replaced with something else. So that's kind of a quick romp through the retrospective. And then I thought maybe we would spend some time on some of the commemorative projects, which probably relate a little more closely to this project with Maxim. This was a project of endurance. It was a collaborative project with Boston-based artist Yuen Wu, who is here today. And it was wonderful to work with. We've become very good friends over the years. And by the way, Yuen has a beautiful show at the ICA right now, Foster Prize winner. If you get yourself to the museum, I think you'll enjoy it. But Joanna and I worked on Leaving's Belongings for quite some time. It's a project about immigration. We had done a previous project at Carleton College that was about global displacement, the millions of people who were displaced globally and wandering the world. And from that, we became very interested in the displacement of, in particular, women and children. So we decided that we wanted to do something about that. And we began by holding workshops with women around the country, Minneapolis, throughout New England, Boston, Albuquerque, Santa Fe. And we got women together. In this particular image of one of the workshops, I like very much because we had women from Mexico, we had women from Afghanistan, we had women from Iraq, and they were all working side by side. Each particular group had an interpreter with them. The idea of this project is that women would tell their stories, that we would collect the stories, we would record the stories, some of the stories would be written. And we felt that in a very traditional way, to sit with a group of women in a kind of sewing circle, or but making and being busy with your hands, would make it more comfortable for these women to tell their stories. And we did many, many of these workshops. We have hundreds, maybe 1,000 of these bundles over all the time that we worked on them. And you can see here in detail, some of them have the stories on them, different languages. And then the piece was exhibited at Site Santa Fe. It had installations, smaller installations in various institutions, but the largest, grandest of them all was this installation at Site Santa Fe. You can see the scale of this cargo net holding all of these bundles. On the back wall, which you can't see because I didn't bring details, but there's many portraits of the women who participated in these programs. This project, it's not done. We haven't worked on it for quite some time. Maybe it'll have a future somewhere else. I don't know. Another view. This is an installation that has traveled quite a bit. This particular group of images was taken from another exhibition at the Weissman Art Museum, but it was shown in New York and it went to Germany and it's traveled quite a bit. It's called Garment Register, and I became very interested in women working in sweat factories. My grandmother did that, and I was particularly interested in the garments, in the dresses. So here I collected a number of dresses. Some people gave to me, some were from the Goodwill. I created these Japanese paper bags for them, and on the front of them is a quote from Virginia Woolf. I don't know if I can't see it from here, but next slide, I think I can. So it was like a registry. The person would come to work, here's a table, you sign in, there's a ledger, there are all of these dresses, they're all on clipboards that were made for them. We're only lightly covered with, what does that say? Buttons and cloth.
And beneath these pavements are bones and silence.
So a lot of my work, I often use poetry, I use quotes by writers, it's in my books, it's in my objects and installations. And you will see this project, Garment Registry, turned into this book, Garment Register. And usually for me, it's an installation followed by a book. The Garment Register, the background of this is a ledger that was found in an abandoned building. Somebody knew that there were some ledgers in this abandoned building, a little breaking and entering. We went in and I found this very slender ledger that had the names of women in it. There were a lot of ledgers, but mostly they were men's names, they were business journals. I never did know what this journal was, what this ledger was from, but it had all the names of these women. And so again, I was imagining women who might have worked in these sweatshops, in these garment factories. So here's just a couple of the pages from it. I like this. This is probably my favorite page. Sorrow was like the wind. It came in gusts. I spent a lot of time going to vintage stores, antique malls, looking for photographs, and started collecting mostly black and white photographs of obviously people that I didn't know, and going through them to come through with enough photographs to use in this book. Then, when I was putting the book together, I would go to vintage clothing stores or to the Goodwill, and I would look for fabric or garment that looked very much like something the woman was wearing in the picture. And I think one of the reasons I like this page so much is that this woman leaning on her balcony with the leaves from this tree in the background, and this particular piece of cloth that's in here looks so much like her dress, and it looks like blossom that was part of a skirt that I found and cut up and put in the book, and it looks very much like something she was wearing, and I thought that the quote went very well with it. So each page has a quote by another woman writer. The woman writer's name is not on the page because I don't want to detract from the anonymous names in the ledger, but at the back of the book the listing is there of all of the folks who wrote them. Another one that I'm very pleased with. Nothing, of course, begins at the time you think it did. And again, it's this idea of finding this cloth that looks so much like this woman is wearing. Doing a book like this is incredibly time-consuming. After I found the photographs, I had to find someone to make negatives for all the photographs. And I wanted then the printer of the photographs to print them as close to the original as possible. So if you were to go through the books, you would see some of the photographs that were more sepia looking. Some were on matte paper, some were on shiny paper. But we did our best to get as close to the original as we possibly could. You will also see from this, even though I don't know the names, my work very much involves naming names. So here's Requiem. Requiem, Tears for the Remembered, is on the war in Iraq. These long scrolls, they range probably from anywhere from 20 to 26 feet, if they're rolled out, have the names written on them of all the American soldiers killed in the war in Iraq. They're in chronological order, so it's an endurance test of writing, and I like to write. It's like being a scribe, very meditative for me, and this is something that I did, let's see, I think when I started this, I think I actually brought some of it with me when I was in residency at the Virginia Center for Creative Arts, where I met UN, and that was in 2010. And I was just kind of writing these names, and I could do a little bit at a time. And the plumb bobs are really iconic for me. I use them in a lot of work. I actually have done a book on plumb bobs. I'm not going to talk about it here today, but I started out being very interested in architecture and working with the plumb, straight, true, perfect. But then as time went on, I began to see it as, for me, sort of an indicator of character and rectitude, because it is truly straight, it's true plumb. It's where heaven above and earth below meet at the point of the plumb. So it always has a very symbolic meaning to me. Another monument to war, enduring Afghanistan. One other thing I'll say about these, I used to do, for many years I did public art, and sometimes in bronze, sometimes in stone. There are always a lot of committees, which seems appropriate to try to get things passed, work that you can do. And I found it to be, I had a lot of questions about it myself when you make public art in the public domain. How long should it last? Should it be there forever? When are we tired of it? When does it not hold meaning for a particular time and place? So that's when I started doing these commemorative pieces on my own. I didn't need help. I could just do them. So here's another one of them. Enduring Afghanistan is a relief map of dog tags. Again, one for each American soldier killed in the war in Afghanistan. It is a topographic map in that the map, it's a relief map because the dog tags are installed in the approximate place where the deaths occurred. So Helmand and Kandahar province have many more dog tags than other parts of the map of Afghanistan. And you'll also see that there's a book in front of it on a stand. The book, again, is me writing the names of all of the people who were killed, soldiers who were killed in that war. So here's a sense of the topography of that map. And again, using really simple materials, just fencing, dog tags. I ordered so many dog tags from a military distributor in Texas and began to think that they might think I was starting a militia in Minnesota. I would get advertising from them. That's interesting. There's a view of the book. The book is sitting on a Quran stand. Another book about the subject of absence, called In the Presence of Absence, about longing and loss. This book covers are glass, and the pages of the book are laser cut. So it's a prose poem that you read in the negative space. Every page is actually the same. And I have someone in Minneapolis who collects my books. And she said, I read this whole book. I read every page. And I said, every page is the same. She said, I know, but I read them all. I read them all out loud. It was kind of a wonderful tribute. I was thrilled with that. And here you get some sense of how you can see through the text, read in the negative space. This project called Drawn in Smoke. This is a project that was done. I'll tell you how it started and what it became. Again, everything goes back to residencies. I've done a number of them and I've enjoyed them all and I found them to be very productive. Again, in 2010 at the Virginia Center for Creative Arts, a lot of artists decided that we needed a break and we went to a big antique mall in town. And I'm always looking for something that speaks to me or catches my eye or something that tells me it's meant for me. And of all the things I found, it was a man's smoking pipe. And it was white and it was carved roses. The bowl was all carved roses. So I took it back to my studio, and residencies are a wonderful time to experiment. And I began thinking about this pipe, and I began trying to think about the smoke, thinking about, this is not a pipe, oh yes it is a pipe. And then I began to work with candle flame and soot, and to see if I could draw with it. But it all came from this pipe. So then I was trying to figure out, what could I do with this? And I went to the library of the residency, and there was a book called Fragments from the Fire by Chris Llewellyn. And it is a book-length prose poem about the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, 1911 tragedy that killed approximately 146 people, mostly women, mostly immigrants, many from Russia and Italy. So I began to think, this is something I could do. It has to have meaning. It's not enough to take smoke and soot and draw with it if it doesn't have any relationship to the context of the work. So this is a wall of all of these drawings. Each drawing has a name written under it, again, the writing of names, and I'm using a very old-fashioned metal tip dipping pen to write the names on these drawings. So there's one for each. I showed this work in New York at Driscoll Babcock Gallery in 2011, the centenary of the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. And it was really interesting. I got some calls. One was from a man who was an historian, complaining about the number of images. There's more than 146 drawings here. And I told him that I was not a scholar, not an artist. I had gone to the Cornell archive on the list of people who were killed, who died in that tragedy. And I wrote one for everybody, every name that was listed, realizing that some of those names, it was the same name, only spelled two different ways. But I couldn't figure out which spelling to accept, so I decided I would do them both. I also, one day I came into the exhibition, and there was a woman there, and she was taking very close-up pictures, and she told me that her grandfather, great-grandfather maybe, was one of the two owners of the Triangle Shirtwaist business. And they were both tried for crimes in that horrible event. And she wanted me to know that her grandfather wasn't guilty. I thought that was interesting, that it haunted her. The drawings were made in the basement of my studio building under a scaffold. So I had scaffolding, and I would put them on the underside of the scaffold, and I was standing under it. And depending on the air currents at the time or the way that I moved, I could make the drawings. And you can see each has a name. So after that installation came a book. The the Drawn in Smoke book. I'm happy to say that this book is in New York at NYU. It's in other collections too, but I was especially happy to know that I just found that out, that it was at NYU, so that pleased me. And then that brings us to the subject of the day. I saw it. And I don't know if we want to talk about that. Do you want me to run through any images, or should we do that together? Should I keep going? All right. Should I tell our story? Okay.
I love it.
Okay. I've been working with a wonderful, brilliant printer in Minneapolis for quite some time. We started doing books together probably 1990, maybe the late 80s. And he came to visit me, and he brought me a book. He brought me this book. His name is Philip Gallo. He's a brilliant typographer and printer, a man of few words. He came to see me. He brought me the book, handed it to me, and he said, "There's a poem in there I think that you should read. It's called I Saw It." I said, "Okay." He said, I think maybe there's a book there. And then he said, "Your grandmother was from Ukraine, right?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay." And he left. So I thought that was interesting. It usually doesn't happen that way. But I read the poem. This was last summer of 22. And the name of the book, I Saw It, Ilya Selvinsky and the Legacy of Bearing Witness to the Shoah. The poem is I Saw It, and was translated by Ilya Selvinsky, but translated by Maxim Shrayer. So I was interested in doing the book, but I wasn't exactly sure how to begin. So I called Phil and I said, "Yeah, I think we can do this." And he said, "Well, then you have to get permission." Okay. So I wasn't sure how to meet Maxim Shrayer. I did not know this man. He doesn't know me. So I contacted Duke Collier, who's collected all of my works and got to know over the years. And I knew that Duke had been to Yale. I saw that Maxim had been to Yale, done his graduate work there. And I said, "Can you find a way for me to introduce me to this man?" So he contacted Christian, right? And you contacted Nina Bagdanovsky, is that right? Did I get right? Okay. And somehow or other.
Fellow librarian here
Right.
at Boston College.
And did you know Maxim? Is that how? So I got this introduction and wrote a letter, and Maxim was interested. And so here we are, a little more than a year later. But it's one of those things that doesn't happen very often. Two people who've never met each other before, across the miles, and You have to be open to such a thing. I appreciate that Maxim was open to it. I was open to it. I would pass images before him. Some he liked, some we tweaked, until we got it where we wanted it to be. So I'm really delighted to be here today at Maxim's request and Christian making these details, and here we are. I can show you some of the images, but do you want to, should I just show images through the book now? Or you want students to read it then?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Title page, obviously. Oh, one of the other things, nice story about it, is that even though I had not yet received permission to do this book for Maxim Shrayer, it was a work in progress. I got an email from Phil Gallo, and it was in, I guess, July, and it was very short, and it said, I have decided on a typeface. Pricing. Everything that Phil does is very deliberate. This is a very angular kind of stroke, a very emphatic typeface. And the typographer was killed in Dachau in 1944. So everything about the book is very much of a piece. And it was important that even the typography represents the work that's being demonstrated or illustrated. And here's the falling man. And the way, every book I do, I make the images from different ways. Sometimes they're photographs, sometimes they're drawings, sometimes they're found objects. And I tried in this one, trying to think of how I wanted to do it. And I wanted it to be very angular, and I wanted it to be, I hesitate to use the word harsh, but I'm not coming up with another word, very crisp. They are cut. They're just cut with the scissors until I get it right. I didn't want the drawing and then draw it and then cut it out. It wasn't done like that. It was cut directly without the drawing. And here's this falling figure. The white that you see is paint on the black. They were cut from black paper, and the white is paint. And here's the figure in the woods. And the text, I think, beautifully placed. Some of the images, I think, will be more meaningful to you when the students read the poem. This is a story of Shoah by bullet, and I believe 7,000, is that a number? Thousands of Jews shot and thrown into a ravine in a single day. This is, from my perspective, the ravine. And the hands reaching. And the landscape, taken from the landscape at that time, of course, very abstract. The left-hand page is a lot of hatch marks. I do that in a lot of work. Paintings is just kind of one of the things I do. I've always counted and marked things off. I've done that since I was a young child. And so it often will appear in paintings, text, and it's this keeping track of, it's keeping track of without naming names, but I'm always counting and thinking about loss and remembrance. And this begins the back matter of the book, the shin, the letter shin from the Hebrew alphabet. To me, it looked a little bit like flames. And then there's the story of, Phil said to me, he said, okay, now you have to write something about your grandmother. And I said, well, I'm not a writer. And he said, no, you have to write something about your grandmother. Well, I don't know too much. Well, then write what you know. So the left-hand side are kind of my remembrances, not necessarily what I know, but the things that I remember. And the opposite side is the little bit that I do know. And then Maxim was asked also to write something about Selvinsky, and I believe about your father and his connection to Selvinsky. And then the very end is the colophon of the book that tells you a little bit about the typography, how many, the kind of paper that was used, the binder, how many in the edition. Do you want to read it?
Thank you so much. So I'm still Maxim Shrayer, professor of Russian, English, and Jewish Studies. I'm in my 28th year here at BC. It's wonderful, first of all, to welcome our guest of honor, Harriet Bart. As you know, we're in the second week of a very trying period, and I think having you here is a source of not just inspiration, but also relief. I also want to say that this event was very generously underwritten by the Institute for the Liberal Arts, by the Burns Library, and I want to thank Christian Dupont and Nina Udanovsky, our wonderful librarians, and also by my home department and the Jewish Studies program. And we're going to do a little surprise, which is what I need to explain is this book comes from two principal sources, and these two sources miraculously came together this fall. One of them is Harriet's work and her collaboration with me, in which I honestly played a minor role, but it was a wonderful collaboration. This artist book, based on what is probably the first published Holocaust poem. It was written in January 1942 and already published in February 1942. The other context is the seminar I teach here on Holocaust literature, which is now in its third iteration. And in this seminar, we study works about the Shoah that start in the 1940s, and then we do them in segments, and we end up in the present. And so I'm very fortunate to have an amazing group of students this fall, and I'd like to invite them here, and they will read the poem. So if you, my dear friends in the Holocaust seminar, could come out here. So they will read the English translation that is used in Harriet's book, that appears in it entirely. And I just want to introduce them all as they appear here, because this is a seminar and I am not the only voice. And of course, there are voices of writers, some of whom are survivors, and others are writers who, of course, were not in the Shoah, but felt that they had an imperative to write about it. So I'm just going to introduce the students, and this is Paloma Carol Ryan, this is Benjamin Mace, now this is Domenico Esposito, this is Aidan Dodd, this is Anastasia O'Reilly, who is actually visiting from the UK. This is a undergraduate class, and it's very diverse and very international. It's wonderful. Now, standing from that side, Jacob Kraft, Aditya Yogesh, Jackson Sigalov, Anna McCabe, and Emma Largan. And now we're going to read I Saw It. Yeah, okay.
I saw it. Germany, now we weave you a shroud, and into it we weave a threefold scourge. Heine, the Silesian weavers. One may choose to dismiss people's tales or disbelieve printed columns of news. but I saw it with my own eyes. Do you understand? I saw it, myself. Here, the road, over there, a higher plane. Between them, just there, a ditch. From the ditch rises boundless pain and sorrow, without end. No, about this one cannot, with words. One must sob, roar. 7,000 murdered ones, in a wolf's hollow, a hollow rusty like ore. Who are these people? Soldiers? Hardly. Perhaps partisans? No. Here lies the pug-nosed Kolka. He's 11 years old. His kin is all here. Merriment Homestead. All the summer straw houses, 120 of them. So dear, so scary. Like new residents, their bodies have moved into the ditch.
Lying, sitting, sliding onto the breastwork, each one his own inimitable pose. Winter froze in the dead ones with the living felt of their death. And corpses wander, menacing, abhorring, like a rally this dead silence rumbles. No matter how they looked when they had fallen, with eyes, bare teeth, shoulders, necks, they wrangle out with their executioners. They cry out, "You will not triumph."
Over the gully there dangles a cripple. His black crutch still juts out. A young hawk bows with his little curved beak, then jumps on the chest, and under the corpse groans. An old woman in a tattered nun's habit, the wax hardened, sealing her left eye. But her right one gazes deep into the heavens, through clefts in this cloudy sky, and such crow calls fill her gullet, such words rage in her throat cavity. Just touch it, and out with seething sounds, a disavowal of divinity.
This means, through this ancient, mossy, overgrown, black crow mysticism, light has burst. If fascists live in this world, then there is no God. Nearby, a mauled Jewish woman and a small child with her. Is he awake? The mother's gray shawl is wrapped with such care around the babe's neck.
O maternal, O ancient strength, walking to the execution, just before she was killed, an hour, half an hour, before the grave, mother was saving child from the chill, and even death has not pried them apart. Over them the enemies have no power. An auburn trickle from the child's ear seeps into the mother's cupped palm.
Go now, brand them. You have seen the bloodbath. You have caught them red-handed, an eyewitness. You see how, with armor-piercing bullets, the executioners decimate us. So thunder now, like Dante, like Ovid. Let nature itself weep and moan. If you saw all of this and did not go mad,
But silent I stand over the burial pit. What words? The words have turned to rot. There was a time I wooed a sweetheart. I praised a nightingale's chant. One might have thought, so what? Same old tune, and yet, try finding the right word, even for a familiar event. And here the nerves are like taut bows, but the strings are deafer than boiled sturgeon sinews. No, for this unbearable torment, no language has been devised.
To do this, one would have to call a council of all tribes, flagpole to flagpole, and from each one take all that is personal. Over the centuries, everything bewailed, and if all tribes were to give to this chorus one word each, one word we all shared, then the great Russian sorrow to each word would add 7.
But if no such language has been devised, even if an unheard of stanzas, I have failed to mourn your blood-soaked sunset. We do have just the kind of speech, more scorching than any verbal artistry,
canister shots, ours misrolled, keep rattling the larynx of the battery. Can you hear the blast at the boundary?
The avenging fire. Murderers grow pale, but they will have nowhere to flee. From your blood-soaked burial, now relax your muscles, lower your eyelids, rise like grass over these heights. He who saw you henceforth forever shall carry your wounds in his heart.
The ditch, teleported in meter, 7,000 corpses, Jews, Slavs. No, about this one cannot with words. Fire, only fire.
Thank you. So as you settle back comfortably in your seats, I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about a couple of contexts that you need to know, and then I'll join Harriet and Christian. So my path to Selvinsky actually goes back to the time before I was born, but I think I already was in the thoughts of my young parents. So when my parents were married, my father was a young poet and medical researcher in Leningrad. My mother was a young Jewish student in Moscow, and they tried living in Leningrad. But if you're a Muscovite, it's not very easy to get used to the chill, to the wind, and to the museumist atmosphere of Leningrad. So they returned to my mother's hometown, and my mother Emilia is here. And I know my father is here. He's not well, but I know he's happy that we're doing it. And so, sorry. Selvinsky was a living legend at the time. Why? Because he was a survivor of the great early Soviet avant-garde. He was one of the leading figures of the 1920s Soviet art, particularly of the constructivist experiment, which by the late 1920s had been suppressed. He survived Stalinism, and he was still productive. Poets flocked to him. And so my father went to Peredelkino, the writer's dacha settlement, where Pasternak also had his dacha, and met Selvinsky. And so growing up, I always had that living connection. So that really long predates the poem. And then eventually, I was already a student of literature, something of a writer myself. I became interested in how the Shoah was witnessed, and that brought me to Crimea and to the story that Selvinsky describes in this poem. And so for the context, you need to know a couple of things. So one of which is that Selvinsky, although he was a famous writer and would have been exempt from the draft, volunteered and ironically ended up fighting in 1941-42 in his native Crimea. He was originally a frontline journalist. He became a political officer, but he wanted to be in the front lines, and that's his press ID for Krasnaya Zvezda, the leading newspaper of the Red Army that was read by millions. Now, and that's a very famous picture, which you will appreciate, because Selvinsky is already a lieutenant colonel. He's already a decorated hero, and on that side is Boris Pasternak, who never tasted a battle and who looks a little bit subdued, and this is Selvinsky on furlough. Now, the geographical context that you need to understand is the Crimean Peninsula, which, as you know, Russia annexed from Ukraine, but of course became part of the Russian Empire during Catherine's time. As the Nazi troops quickly advanced in the summer and fall of 1941, and as they advanced, the Einsatzgruppen advanced with them, carrying out what is known as the Shoah by bullet, where basically 1 million people were killed, not in the death camps, which is what the West still thinks the Holocaust was about, but more or less where they lived. In their towns, in their communities, in the most industrially unimaginative fashion. But and it made it so much more horrible. It happened in plain sight of the communities. So Crimea was a place that the Soviet troops defended, and by November 1941, the Nazis took the entire peninsula, with the exception of the seat of the Black Sea Navy. And then, in a daring operation at the end of December 1941, the Soviet troops took back the eastern part of Crimea, that peninsula known as the Kerch Peninsula, which kind of sticks out to the east. And this is the first-hand evidence that is documented, witnessed, photographed, and filmed of the Shoah by bullet. Selvinsky found himself here. He stood more or less here, and if you were to go there, not that you would now, because why would you want to go to an annexed territory by a dictatorship, but eventually, when all of this, I think, is resolved and Crimea becomes free again, you would be able to go there and you would see this anti-tank ditch, which extends for about 1 kilometer, and still here, beneath this thin layer of feather grass, there are Jewish bones and skulls. Back then, what Selvinsky saw looked like this. It's an anti-tank ditch filled to the brim with corpses. It looked like an open-air morgue. What's different here is that when, say, the Soviet troops began to liberate the occupied territories, let's say, places like Kiev and Babi Yar, of course, they did not see recently killed people. They saw pulverized bones. These people had been killed perhaps a week before Selvinsky arrived there as a frontline journalist. And what he saw was at the time unimaginable. Nobody in his generation had seen such things. There were women, children, the elderly. The vast majority of them were Crimean Jews, Ukrainian Jews, some Polish Jewish refugees. There were also some Slavs who were killed, probably from the local guerrilla movement. However, of course, to those who knew a little more about genocide, this evoked the memories of Armenian genocide and Assyrian genocide in the Ottoman Empire in 1915-1916. And therefore, if you remember, when Raphael Lemkin, who coined the term genocide during World War II, who was a Polish Jew who was living in the United States, when he was thinking about genocide, the Shoah was still happening. He thought back to this. And so it's a continuum of images. But the task of writing a poem about it was literally unsurmountable. So the text that is in Harriet's book is this text that Selvinsky wrote in the early days of January, and in his journal he wrote that he could not imagine writing about it in prose. He was supposed to write a frontline report. He wrote a long poem. And the last thing I want to say, so in other words, imagine a frontline journalist who's a poet standing and beholding a sight like that. And this is not to provoke, this is just to draw a line that connects these events. I keep thinking of what it was like for a photographer or a journalist who was taking these pictures in southern Israel, who may not have had a grandparent or a parent who was a survivor of the Holocaust. This is a continuum. These are genocides. And so what we're talking about today did not just happen in 1915, and it did not just happen in 1941. It still happens in the world today. So with this, I would like to join Harriet and Christian in and have our enlightened conversation. Thank you.
Okay, well, if we can move this projector out of the way. I don't know that I need a microphone. Okay, if you do, Harriet, we can give you the microphone. Let us know, wave a hand in the back. If you'd like a little more amplification, we can pass the microphone a little bit. One of the lines, Maxime, that I heard in the poem the students reading is that you saw it, and I was hearing all of it, and yet you did not go mad. Right? One of you read that? Who read that passage? Maybe you can read it back to us again. And while you're looking for that, what I wanted to ask both of you is to think about the experience of your work, what you bring. You bring experience, your life experience, to your work. Your work brings you back an experience that is embodied in this and that comes to us. So Maxime, as a researcher, you've done extensive original research, archival research, in creating, I saw the book, the fact that Selvinsky and looking at wrote many iterations of the same poem of which he could not write. And then you have translated it. Translating is a different work than it is of doing research. So do you have the passage there?
I'm sorry,
The passage I'm remembering it was, and yet I saw it, I'm hearing all of it myself here, but and yet I saw it and did not go mad. And so this is kind of the why question. How do we, because it seems like much art or a human experience, we must go on. And how is it that what you do and how you bring
You go on through art.
to go on through art is your answer. But can you read that passage again?
Go now, Brandon. You have seen the bloodbath. You have caught them red-handed, an eyewitness. You see how, with armor-piercing bullets, the executioner's decimators. So thunder now, like Dante, like Ovid. Let nature itself weep and moan. If you saw all of this and did not go mad.
I would tell a story. So the biggest story in the book is how you not go mad after having witnessed this and written about it, but also how you survive in a regime that just happened to be fighting Nazism, just happened to be fighting the ones who were eradicating European Jews, but in many ways was very similar to it. Selvinsky, by late 1943, becomes a persona non grata in the Soviet Union. He's blacklisted. He's the only one who has 3 party resolutions that target him, and he basically is forced to return to Moscow, and he spends a whole year there unable to function and publish, and the punishment was very sophisticated. It came from Stalin, because Stalin knew that Selvinsky wanted to be there when the Soviet troops were beginning to liberate Ukraine, and then to liberate the camps in eastern Poland in the summer of 1942. He was not able to witness any of that. Eventually, in the spring of 1945, he was allowed to return to the army. He found himself in East Prussia. East Prussia is the first territory of the Reich where the Soviet troops came. I won't go into what was happening there, but a lot of bad things were happening there. And Selvinsky was a famous writer. He was a senior field officer. He was in Königsberg. There was a German woman with a girl who looked particularly emaciated. He gave him some of his rations. A captain who was 2 ranks below him publicly accosted him and said, "Comrade Lieutenant Colonel, I don't understand you. After what these people have done to us, how can you do this? Who are you helping? Look at what they've done to our children." Selvinsky turned red and he said, "Kerch still haunts me in my dreams, but it does not mean that I'm going to turn this into a Königsberg ditch." And then he invited the whole group of officers to tour the grave of Immanuel Kant, who was buried in Königsberg. So this is kind of roundabout answer to your question. And I think he certainly felt that revenge is only one part of it, but there are many other parts of survive as a writer and an intellectual who witnessed it.
So I was wanting to ask you as well, then, Maxime, is having heard these stories through your father, through your family, and then later researched them, that discipline of what you uncovered in yourself as you worked through the research, putting the story together, which hadn't really been told, yes, right? And then the translation work. Translation, I imagine, was different for you. When you went to do it, right? This is a beautifully poetic translation. We've witnessed that ourselves. This is not just, you know, a literal, there's feeling in this poetry.
I'd like Harriet to talk, but I just want to say I was very fortunate because I've done 3 books which are criticism and biography, which are deeply researched, but also have original text in my translation. And I really like this form. And so how Harriet came to know I saw it is from the appendix in this book, which has 2 poems that Selvinsky wrote about this. One he wrote in the immediate aftermath of witnessing, and the other he wrote about 9 months later, and it's a lot more meditative. Perhaps it's another book. Yeah.
So what did, well done with you, Harriet. So you had someone that this is this 5th or 6th degree of separation, right? With this mysterious brought you the poem.
Right.
And then you read it.
Right.
So
I read the poem, and I would not have known the poem if Phil Gall hadn't brought it to me. So I'm very grateful that he brought it to me. And it resonated. It's part of the history, if you go back far enough to my family, to the Jewish history. So I'm fortunate enough that I escaped that period of time. But I think that it's very hard for Jews, and particularly Jews of my generation and even older, to deny that this was not a traumatic generational event. I mean, you grew up with that in your community with this, and everybody you knew somebody who was, it's just like what's happening now. Everybody I know knew somebody who lost their lives in the Holocaust. So even though I have degrees of separation, it's also personal.
but was there something in the poem itself when you first read it, when it was Phil Gallow's suggestion, maybe there's a book in here?
Yeah, I think probably when he said, your grandmother was there, wasn't she? I said, yeah, this is a link. And I was very close to this set of grandparents. And it was an interesting time when I had an opportunity, thanks to the US government maybe, to live with my grandparents. Because they were poor, they came to this country with nothing, and they shared everything. One of the things that was useful to me is that my grandmother's house was very much like a commune. Anybody was welcome. So as a small child, I would go to bed in the evening, and I never knew how many people would be sleeping there that night. I would get out of bed in the morning, there would be people sleeping on the floor, people sleeping, multiple people, wherever they could find a spot. Dining table was big, everybody was welcome. So it was like bringing in all of these immigrants, people who had no place to go, people that came together to share food or whatever they had. That was a deeply moving experience for me, and not part of my, as an only child, of my everyday life. So it was very special. And meeting all of these people, and a lot of them young, also with a very large family. My grandparents had a very large family. I have aunts who are not much older than I. Now I am very old, and so are they. But at the time, I was a young child, and they were just maybe 4 years older than I. So there were young children there too, in this big family. So I thought back to what that immigrant experience of my grandparents' generation brought to me, and how rich and how meaningful that was. So it was important.
What questions might you have? And I'm recognizing the time here, it's 4:15. Class time is over, maybe students have to go to other classes, others who may need to move on, but otherwise we can stay and converse here, and I feel like we should do that. Sam?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment, excuse me, personal observation, which is my father was involved with World War II. And what's moving about this poem to me is that he never spoke about his experiences. And most of the men that he fought with or was in war with never spoke, at least to my generation, about their experiences. They might have spoken among themselves. But what's interesting to me about this poem is that when you see these kind of events and bear witness, you really need a language. And here's a man, maybe because of his background or his sensitivity or whatever, who found a way not to go mad because he had language. And otherwise you tend to internalize it, and especially my generation is Vietnam War generation, there's a lot of post-traumatic stress where people simply don't have a mechanism. And I give him a great deal of credit, not only to be a witness and bear witness, but also to struggle through his art to find a way to not only share it, but manage it in some meaningful way.
I think you're absolutely correct. And in fact, I've argued in this book, but I actually would like to write a kind of polemical piece about it, that the particularly unique experience of a number of writers from the Soviet Union who became frontline officers is precisely that they found themselves in the position to bear witness. Others include Vasily Grossman, for instance, who wrote The Hell of Treblinka, but they also made literary texts and art from agony. This is a distinctly different experience, distinctly different from the experience of the Allied troops. In fact, very few of the writers who were already prominent in the United States, in the UK, in Canada, became frontline reporters, and of those, very few wrote anything about the Shoah. And in general, the idea of writing reportage, not as a newspaper article, but as poetry or richly literary journalism or fiction, is not one that was common in the experience of Anglo-American writers during World War II. And why that is remains to be discovered.
Others?
I have an observation that I'll try to twist into a question. I noticed as we were listening to the poem that the poet talks a lot about the insufficiency of words. And I somewhat recently read Primo Levi's work and a few others. I just noticed that's very common, perhaps universal, to the writers who attempt to write about the Shoah, as they feel that words aren't enough. And yet we yearn for some sort of understanding of what happened. And so I guess maybe I'd be curious to know how this poet's experience trying to communicate through words what perhaps cannot be communicated through words, what his experience with that has in common or differs from those other authors, in your estimation, working with his text.
This is a wonderful, really articulate question, and we talk about exactly these kinds of things in the seminar at length, and I hesitate to answer it flippantly, except to confirm exactly what you said, that I think that two principal experiences. One is the more common one, which is silence. Of course, the majority of the writers who were frontline officers did not write these kinds of texts. They may have written reportage, or they may have written diaries. So this is a particularly unique response, which is a response in poetry that also acknowledges its insufficiency, its weakness, its being incommensurate with the experience it describes, right? So you are absolutely correct. And I guess what I'd like to do is to turn the question for Harriet in the sense that what we have done, which Harriet has done, she has made visual art from a poem that came out of, in a sense, the inability to bear witness, but an imperative to do it nevertheless.
I mean, that's the purpose of art and the culture. Of all of the arts, the visual arts and the literary arts, find a way to say that which is often unspeakable, often for which there are no words to say it. And that's why when we look at what is preserved in other, what do we value, what is in our museums, the arts have a way of saying the things that many of us are unable to say. And sometimes words fail for poets and writers, and sometimes it fails for artists too. And you do the best you can with the limited abilities that you have to try to make something meaningful that will speak to someone. Not everybody, we can't reach everybody, but we do our best to try. So I think that for, as I had said in my brief comments, that each of us is formed by the era in which we grow up, in which we're raised. And so I come out of a war generation, and I view the world through that prism. So I'm always trying to either mark it, collect it, draw it, build it, and everything has that kind of reference to it, because that is the experience of my family, but my experience too, starting with the dropping of the atomic bomb.
Okay, Aaron.
Thank you for this. This has been lovely. I was wondering if you could talk more about your collaboration, working together, you doing your poetry and then your black and white, very stark kind of work. How does that work together with you two?
One of the resources that gives me heart, the way I usually turn when I'm looking for information or I'm trying to process information, is I turn to the poets. I'm a reader, but there's something about poetry that just goes right to the heart of the matter for me. So that is always a draw. So here's this opportunity to work with this beautiful translation of this harrowing event. It's kind of like manna from heaven. I get to do this thing. So I have worked with poetry before, but usually the poetry I'm using is either the poet is dead. Certainly I'm generally not known, the poet or the writer, but it is an inspiration for me. I'm working on something I'm going to present next month, and it's the poet Wisława Szymborska. His work is really, really important to me. Also, of course, I'm reading it in translation. So we thank the translators who allow us to appreciate and the beauty and the haunting reality that these poets bring to us. So without the translators, much would be lost to me, and so we appreciate that. So this was kind of just fell in my lap. Philip brought it to me, Maxim was ready, and so was I. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
And I might just add that, of course, I think that the heart of translation lies a certain ethics of trust. In this case, I think I felt privileged because I was closely connected to the family. I knew Selvinsky's daughter, who was a visual artist. He didn't want his children, he had two daughters like I did, but he didn't want them to be poets. I actually am happy that one of them write poetry, but he pushed them into the visual arts, and one became a visual artist, and basically she gave me a trove of materials that are in my possession. And so I felt that by the time we were doing this book, she had passed away. Her name was Tatiana. But I felt that somehow, I represented more than myself here. But what I also want to say is, it's either you have it or you don't. I trusted Harriet right away.
Thank you.
And I don't think I micromanaged it much.
I sent you one image, and you said, I like it. It was just to see if we were going to be able to do first one I did. And I sent it to you to see, because it doesn't always work. It may be that the work I do isn't sympathetic enough to the work of the poet, or he or she would prefer something else. So it was really, I have to say, it was a pleasure to work on something that was so difficult. I mean, the subject is so difficult, and yet I was not encumbered by someone looking over my shoulder all the time, and I really feel that we had a very trusting working relationship, and this is the first time we've met, and I feel like I've known Maxim for quite some time.
It was all through
Yeah, it's
email and
just
phone occasionally.
So this is our first meeting.
Go
I'm wondering, as a visual artist who works on memory and commemoration, and you've written about other wars and other traumas and other events and activism, but here in this work you come back to what is for many people, at least in our world today, the touchstone of memory of the Holocaust, which has shaped so much of how we address memory of heavily traumatic events. How is it to go back to this kind of moment of memory? It's true that Maxim says there's earlier genocides and there's other notions, but the Holocaust has become the paradigm for all of us and how to approach such events. How is that for you in your
my
art?
work?
Yes.
I think it probably has the largest impact on my work. When I tell you about the hatch marks in the back of the book, that's from being a child and wondering how many people had died. That was dreaming, imagining myself writing these on the wall. So it was part of the conversation in, well, it was certainly in the news, but also in my family. And it's right here. I mean, those little marks wind up everywhere in my work. They're in paintings, they get cut out of paper, and they wind up here. The tallying mark, the counting. And I think part of Judaism is about may you be inscribed in the book of life, and this inscription of the name, and sometimes inscribed in the book of death, and in multitudes. So I just feel like it's been not something I had to reach back for. It's maybe the beginning that started all the other commemorative works. But I'd really not worked with it because I felt a little uncomfortable doing it because it is not my direct experience. But working with, through Maxim, with the words of the poet who did experience, gave me permission, I felt, to do it. Very briefly, I did another project that was visually successful and culturally very unsuccessful, very popular. It's put away and it will never be seen. But my mistake in it was that it was not the American experience. So I felt very comfortable making work that responded to the war in Vietnam, the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq. But the minute I stepped into another war that had nothing to do with my family background or the fact that I'm an American citizen, I got myself into trouble, and it did not work out well for me. So, but the rest of it feels like it's my territory, that Shoah is something, though not a direct experience, is something that I grew up with in conversation, and worry. I mean, that was a constant kind of anxiety and fear, and so I feel comfortable, not comfortable, but I feel that I can do that. I can do work like that. It's acceptable if I do it a couple of generations later.
Why don't we close with that, actually, and we can continue conversation together. We have Harriet and Maxim's books, if I may, Harriet's book in front of us. We have a few other things here as a display. There's some coffee and tea and sodas in the next room, and we can be here as long as you want, and people can come and if you need restrooms, there's on this level, there's one outside the door here. Down the stairway below, I can help you find your way, okay? But please feel free to stay and converse with Harriet and Maxim and with each other, and thank you very much for coming today.